is Shania Hunt, and I go to UCLA, and I currently work for Harvard Westlake, where I coach both the middle school and high school debate team, but I also am the editor-in-chief of the LD portion of Champion Briefs. And with that being said, this is the video topic analysis for the March-April LD topic, which is resolved: the United States ought to promote democracy in the Middle East. So the hope for this video topic analysis is to give you just a little bit more background on what the topic really is about, some general definitions of the topic, what promoting democracy really looks like, as well as just give you a good foundation for you to continue research on both the affirmative and the negative, so that hopefully you'll go out and win some more debate rounds. So don't let this video topic analysis be the only background knowledge that you receive for this topic. You should obviously be doing some extra work outside of this, such as researching and reading some topic literature reviews that are in a lot of scholarly journals. But also you can check out the Champion Briefs, where we have a great compilation of evidence, topic analysis, etc. It's a good leg up on your competition. You already have a lot of the basics down after you go through our brief. And this past month for March, April, we have a really fantastic brief for you. So hopefully this will help too, but let other areas of research and background knowledge help you as well. So I'm going to do three things within this video topic analysis. The first is I'm going to talk about the expectation for March, April, and the type of competition that you're going to encounter, as well as what type of tournaments you're going to go to. Next, I will talk about some general definitional analysis of what the topic means and the burdens for both the affirmative and the negative. And lastly, I'll give some just general background knowledge on the topic itself. So with that, let's first talk about the expectation for the March-April debate. So primarily, your competition is not going to be the same as you normally get, regardless of what type of tournaments you go to, whether they be purely local tournaments, circuit tournaments, whatever it might be. Not only is the competition different, but also the type of tournament that you're going to is different. So you're not going to have as many Tournament of Champions tournaments going on, so that means that your competition will actually probably be mostly local, unless if you're going to a state tournament. But lots of schools are still trying very, very hard to qualify to big major tournaments, such as the NSDA National Tournament, as well as your state tournament. Remember that this is the last chance for a lot of people to qualify in LD to their state tournament. So they're going to be working very hard. You should be working hard as well. But also the tournaments themselves are going to be very different from the general year. This is some of your competitors' last chance to qualify, as well as their only chance to qualify for NSDA Nationals. So that's kind of the different expectation for March, April that you're going to see, rather than what you see for other topics, especially Jan, Feb, or even September, October. So that's the expectation. Now let's talk a little bit about the topic. So once again, the topic is resolved: the United States ought to promote democracy in the Middle East. So first, let's talk about some literal definitions and some kind of interesting side notes that go with each part of the resolution. So the first phrase is "in the United States." This is pretty straightforward. Obviously, it indicates the actor of the resolutional action, which is promoting democracy in the Middle East. But it's very useful because identifying the actor helps for you to narrow down what type of arguments you're looking for. So you're not looking for just a general democracy promotion good, but rather you're looking for democracy promotion by the United States is good. That also leads the way for the negatives to have some unique criticisms of the affirmative by criticizing the United States promoting democracy in the Middle East, rather than simply promoting democracy in the Middle East being bad. So that's the interesting side note with the United States being the specific actor of the resolution. The next word is ought. So ought is normally defined as used to express an obligation, whether that be moral or otherwise. Normally, this definition of ought isn't really contested, but rather used to indicate that the value for the resolution is morality or justice or whatever it might be. So just know that you probably would like to have this type of definition to justify what your value is if you normally encounter a lot of value and value criterion debates. But know that it's just asking, we are prescribing some type of action. Should the U.S. do this? Do we have an obligation to do this? And so on and so forth. So the next phrase is to promote. This starts off the verb of the resolution that is also kind of interesting when you couple it with to promote democracy. So promote itself is kind of an iffy term, especially when we're trying to promote a specific thing like democracy. There are lots of different definitions and lots of means of implementation. Merriam-Webster defines promote as to contribute to the growth or prosperity of, to help bring as an enterprise into being. So as you can see, the vagueness of that definition is like pretty huge, which means there are lots of ways to promote something. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to start a democracy or that we have to completely go in and create this like bottom up or top down approach in terms of creating a democracy. This could mean literally that we are just trying to start to implement a democracy, that we are aiding the growth of a democracy via aid of some form, maybe even if you're crazy enough starting a revolution. However, I wouldn't probably suggest that, but just to show there are lots of different ways to promote democracy itself. So some things to think about is the leeway here is both a good and a bad thing. It's good for you because there's lots of different avenues for you to explain how you want to promote democracy and lots of different impacts that you can garner, but it's also probably not as good because this is definitely a huge place for theoretical violations. People might say, or theoretical objections, people might say that your version of to promote is too simple, too narrow, too vague, too overgeneralized, whatever it might be. So regardless of what you do, even if you think it's the best definition of to promote or the most common definition of to promote, make sure that you have a couple theoretical justifications for why your specific version of implementing the resolution is a good one. But that's always generally a good thing to have under any topic, but just even more so specifically this topic. Finally, there is the phrase in the but before that, actually, there's like democracy itself. I'm going to talk a little bit about democracy in a little bit with the general background of the resolution. But democracy, there are multiple different definitions for it. Definitions from saying that we simply just want free and fair elections to definitions that say that democracy is something that has an equal amount of contestation and inclusiveness, to even more definitions. It's very highly contested on what democracy actually is. So you can definitely gain a lot of leeway there as well, but also similar to promote, there's a lot of theoretical objections. All right, now finally is the phrase in the Middle East. This is an important term because it shows the area receiving the democracy promotion from the United States. The Middle East is defined by dictionary.com loosely as the area from Libya to Afghanistan, usually including Egypt, Sudan, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other countries of the Arabian Peninsula. However, a lot of people include other countries in this definition as well that aren't necessarily geographically in the Middle East, but might be seen to be a part of the Middle East due to different relationships that are crucial in terms of trade or like religious connections and so on and so forth. Also, a side note here is, and things to think about, are issues like, can the AF only defend promoting democracy in one country or in all countries? Saying that, through the resolution being the United States ought to promote democracy in the Middle East, that could definitely mean in the entirety of the Middle East, or it could mean just in one country, two countries, three countries, etc. So this could definitely be the basis of a topical justification for why plans might be good or bad. Plans, by the way, meaning that you indicate or narrow a specific subset of the resolution or a specific way of like actually implementing the resolution. So that could just be another theoretical objection and a way that you can use words in the resolution and the grammatical explanation of how they're used and placed in the resolution to justify why plans might be good or bad. All right, so that's just some general definitions of the resolution. Now let's talk about what each side generally defends. I believe that as the affirmative, your burden is to defend some version of the United States promoting democracy in the Middle East. And honestly, like for the most part, it doesn't really matter how you promote democracy in the Middle East as long as you can justify it. You can say that promoting democracy in the Middle East is sending aid over, whether it be military aid, economic aid, whatever it might be. You can say that promoting democracy democracy in the Middle East is going over and literally replacing governments, which the United States has done not in the greatest way in the past. There are lots of different ways in which you can implement the resolution. Just know that you have to defend some version of the United States, like promoting democracy in somewhere in the Middle East or the entirety of the Middle East. Next, the negative can defend criticisms of any part of the democracy promotion process. I think that this is a very unique spot for the negative to be in because they can criticize simply the United States promoting democracy. They can criticize promotion of democracy in the first place. They can criticize a particular country having democracy in it or promoting democracy in a certain way. There's lots of different avenues for the negatives to take part in. So that makes it kind of a more fun way for the topic to go about, because the affirmative not only has to justify every part of the resolution as per always, but it has to think uniquely, why is it good that this particular actor is promoting democracy, and has to equally watch out for making sure that they don't just say democracy promotion is good. All right, so that's generally what the AF and the neg have to defend. Lastly, I'm going to go over some background on the topic itself. I think it's kind of important to talk about what democracy promotion looks like and what a democracy really is, and a little bit more in depth, because no matter what, you're going to encounter different definitions of democracy, and I think it's important that you know that there are problems with all definitions, and that there's not one universally accepted definition of what a democracy is. Most people, when you ask them what is a democracy, they literally just say, oh, you have the ability to vote. But that obviously is way too vague. I'll talk about it more in a little bit, but you shouldn't go into this topic just thinking, okay, I'm just making sure that people have the ability to vote in an election. That is not all that a democracy is about. So what's important to define democracy, when it's important to define democracy, you first must understand what kind of the opposite of democracy is, which is a dictatorship. And like generally speaking, there are multiple different forms of dictatorships. It's a regime that's not a democracy when you define it. Monarchies, oligarchies, etc. That's like the easier, more simple definition of what a dictatorship is. But a democracy tries to get away from that definition of a dictatorship. So now let's talk a little bit about how to define what that democracy is. Some ways that people have tried to define it in the past are first via source of authority, so who rules. Normally in a democracy, there are a certain group of people or one person that rules, and generally there is some check on that source of authority, so it's not a dictator ruling everyone and anything that they say goes. Rather, it's a group of different people in a government constantly checking each other, sometimes with someone who is an overall ruler, sometimes not. Second is we might try to define democracy via the purposes or goals of what that government is trying to do. Democracy generally tries to pursue democratic goals. Wow, that's super vague, but what are democratic goals? Democratic goals might be increasing education values, increasing transparency, increasing the well-being of their citizens via health or some other means. There are lots of different things that democracies try to do, and those are kind of the things that different different groups like Freedom House try to look for in a democracy to figure out how democratic they really are. Another way, and the third way that people generally try to define what a democracy is the terms of the institution. So there are formal rules that govern who holds power, but whether those rulers are elected in a free and fair election might be a part of it. What are those formal rules? We don't really know, so we have to define it a little bit more. So those are the three ways people generally try to define a democracy, not necessarily the best ways. So I'm going to give you a couple different definitions of democracy and kind of go through them. So first, Robert Dahl, who is from Yale, wrote Dahl's Two Dimensions of Democracy, and I think that this is probably one of the better definitions of democracy. And Dahl defines democracy by two things, by contestation and by inclusiveness. Contestation is about how accepted the democracy is taken, and inclusiveness is who is able to participate in the political process. So, for example, the Soviet Union might have had high inclusiveness through elections, but low contestation, so that participation, however it might have been very high, didn't really matter because the election was rigged. Like, nobody could actually stand up against the government. If you didn't vote for whoever they wanted you to vote for, then you all of a sudden lost multiple rights or had some type of backlash against you. Another example is in South Africa, where there was large amount of segregation in who was allowed to vote. There was high contestation, but low inclusiveness because only whites could vote. So that's just to prove that just contestation alone or just inclusiveness alone is not enough to create a democracy. Rather, a combination of both contestation and inclusiveness is important. I think that this is probably one of the better definitions of democracy because it really hits at the heart of what a democracy is looking for. It's looking for the ability for everyone to vote and them to feel however they want in terms of what their government is doing and to have whatever opinion they really desire. That's really important for democratic values. But Dahl calls regimes with high contestation and high inclusiveness polyarchies, which is to show that this is the ideal that democracies are aiming for. And that isn't necessarily what democracies are because there's always going to be lower inclusiveness, lower contestation via some means. But regardless, that's what is supposed to be the ideal democracy, the perfect democracy, highest amount of contestation, highest amount of inclusiveness. The next definition is Huntington's definition of a democracy, and I think that there are a couple problems with Huntington's definition that make Dahl's definition better, but his definition is a country is democratic to the extent that its most powerful collective decision makers are selected through free, honest, and periodic elections in which candidates freely compete for votes and in which virtually all the adult population is eligible to vote. So there are a couple different problems with this definition of democracy, though. The first is that there are multiple problems with the clauses. There are lots of vague like terms and phrases in there. Virtually all the adult population is eligible to vote. In the U.S., before the 19th Amendment was passed and gave women the right to vote, it was the U.S. not democratic before this? We don't really know. Or the 1960s Equal Rights Act. These are things to take into consideration. Another phrase, candidates freely compete for votes. It costs an average of $10.5 million in the U.S. to win a seat. That's pretty ridiculous. Is that freely competing for votes? We don't really know. Or even that its most powerful collective decision makers. Who are the most powerful collective decision makers? It's not just simply one person. There are multiple people who are not elected that are extremely powerful. So those are just some problems with the clauses. But there's also an electoral fallacy comparing relatively free elections with a country being democratic. Iran and Cuba hold free elections, but we can't really tell much about the quality of that democracy. That's where I think it's important to enter Dahl's definition of democracy and saying that, yes, free and fair elections are good, but free and fair elections are only truly good when there's high amounts of contestation and high amounts of inclusiveness. So finally, let's talk about how you would measure a democracy. There are two different ways. There's the polity scale as well as the Freedom House scale. The polity scale ranges countries on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being as democratic as possible, 1 being as autocratic as possible. It's based mostly on the competitiveness and openness of recruitment, extent to which political parties are free, based on political participation, etc. So, for example, Saudi Arabia is -10 and Vietnam is currently a -6. It allows us to distinguish between autocracies and democracies on a greater scale, though. So that's why the polity scale is kind of interesting. But the Freedom House scale also is pretty good. It measures the degree to which rights, to how many rights people have access to, whether or not there are problems in the countries, whether or not it's transparent, minorities have autonomy, etc. And this has been a code for which countries have followed for multiple different years. And there are multiple data sets online. So that's how you would measure a democracy and figure out what country is the most democratic. And over the past, there have been a lot of different trends in democracies, lots of different waves, both a wave for democracy and a reverse wave that has more democracies backsliding into autocracies. That doesn't really matter as much, but what is important to note is that while there's been these different waves, there is a difference in how people have tried, or rather how countries have tried to promote democracies in other countries. So it might be important to look at those. For example, if you look at the wave of democracy through which the U.S. was trying to colonize other countries, that might have been not as good of a way to promote democracy as a more recent wave of democracy where we're largely trying to send aid to other countries and try to make sure that they protect the rights of their citizens more. So that's why it might be important to look at historical trends in democracy purely for more examples of how democracies have been promoted in the past by particular actors and whether or not they have been good or bad. So that's just a general background of what a democracy is and how to promote that democracy. You obviously have to think about whether or not the United States as a particular actor promoting democracy is a good thing, but I'm going to let you kind of think about that your own. Use this topic analysis once again as a starting point for your researching process. You should definitely go to Google Scholar, to JSTOR, and to other search engines and try to look for different articles, read different literature reviews, figure out how democracy has been promoted by the US, by other countries in the past, and figure out whether or not that has worked. And if you want to look into what some good examples of what AF and neg arguments are, then I would suggest taking a look at the Champion Briefs LD brief for March, April, and you'll see a lot of really fantastic suggestions from multiple different writers, and hopefully that will give you a couple ideas to even jumpstart your researching process even more. So thanks for listening. I hope that you take a look at other forms of like learning about the topic, and I hope that this is a help to you, and I really hope that you go out and you do extremely well and try your hardest on the March, April topic and qualify to whatever tournament that you're trying to qualify for, or simply do the best that you can.